all of these people suffered in a certain sense. Because no disrespect to them, and I'm not talking egotistically, there was certain research that they could have done then that they didn't do. In fact, nobody did it until I began to do it. Right? Because when you begin to do this type of research that I began to do, then you have to commit yourself to do it for a large section of your life. If you're not going to do it properly, then you can't do it. You can't just dip in and out. This research means going back to the original records. Working scientifically with knowledge and with inheritance. And I thought we might begin with some very important concepts. Arthur Schoenberg, a very famous and well-known, this is a picture there, African from Puerto Rico stroke America, said when Professor John Henry Clarke, who I regard very highly, came to see him, wanted to understand about Black history, African history. He was a young man of 17, younger than many of you here. And Arthur Schoenberg said, go away. He said, what do you mean? He said, you want to know about Black history? No, you're wasting your time, and my time too. He said, I don't understand, I've traveled all the way from my home, hundreds of miles. And I want you to teach me Black history. He said, I can't teach you about Black history. First thing that you've got to understand is about world history. When you begin to understand about world history, then I can tell you your part in the world and explain the missing pages. So go away. Go and learn your Latin and your Greek and your whatever, and your Arabic and your French and stuff. Go and read your history about the Romans and the Greeks and Henry VIII and all those different people. Go and read about all of that. So you've got a structure. And then come back to me. Professor John Henry Clarke, being diligent as he was, did do the research and then came back to him. They said, right, now we can begin. This is the missing pages of history. Yes. So this is where I want us to think about things. Because often when we talk about our history, we talk in some kind of abstract, fantastical way. There's little relation to reality. It doesn't fit any kind of pattern or structure. It helps us to understand how we got to be where we are right now, or how we move forward from where we are right now. That's because those people who are often teaching that stuff don't have an understanding of world history, so they can't see how you fit within the world. There's one world. It's not two worlds, it's one world. I mean, in a spiritual sense, you might say there's more than one, but in a physical sense, there's one. So the history of the world is a circle, and we have to understand our part within it. The concept that we need to sort of grasp is, how do we work scientifically? Well, the word science comes from the word scientia, which means understanding, knowledge, the capacity to understand the knowledge. Now the Greeks follow whichever kind of patriarchal, misogynistic, stroke racist, stroke conceptually blind vision of the world, decided to divide the natural sciences into four main components: biology, chemistry, physics. Yes? And these concepts of division, biology, physics, chemistry, physics, yes, are called the natural sciences. And yet, also to confuse us, they also then say, in the Eurocentric way, political science. So politics is also a science, is it? But they just told us that natural sciences are the true sciences. But then they say it's political science. Then they say, oh, there's social science. And yet they just told us that the sciences were biology, chemistry, and then they said there's computer science. So there's a science in computers, is there? But they just told us the science was biology, chemistry, and then mathematics. Isn't that a science? Doesn't have rules, equations, figures, mathematical calculations? Don't you need to deduce things and work out things? So scientifically, let's pull that Eurocentric thing away. Scientifically is working in a fashion consistently and continuously, and anyone that does so is working scientifically. John Coltrane is a scientific musician because he worked on things systematically and continuously. Marcus Garvey is a scientific organizer. Right? You don't organize 11 million people without working scientifically. So Marcus Garvey is working consistently, continuously on a program, implementing that program, working out how that program was, and then putting it into effect. He tests out his hypothesis on the street. He tests it out through work on the street, and then the street produces results, businesses, companies, employment, armies, etc., etc., etc. The next thing we need to concept or conceptualize is how do we work scientifically? We need to use all the capacities and faculties that are available to us. I said before that the division of things is not helpful, but that doesn't mean that we can't use logic, but we use logic with intuition, imagination and creativity. So what I'm saying to you, don't give up logic. Use it, but use it with intuition, creativity, imagination. Even with your imagination, you need discipline. Even with your creativity, you need discipline. I'm just saying the discipline, the creativity, the imagination goes with the logic. Use the logic, but don't let the logic override your imagination, and don't let your imagination override your logic. This helps us to understand. And the European, in the way that he works, and she, the way that the European works in terms of things is that they validate themselves. The European validates him, herself. That's why these elections that we're having right now, about Europeans validating themselves, right? They get validation from themselves. And the validation determines position, title, occupation, and ultimately power, access to power. This power is not only national, it is also global. They also validate you. The people that run the countries in the Caribbean and the Africa are validated from here and from America. These P.J. Pattersons and all these other peoples, right? Who used to run and who still run. Questions later, yeah.
No question.
Yeah.
Except Mugabe.
Okay, yeah. But even he himself was validated to get himself in that position, as you well know, at Somerset House. They invited him there to Somerset House. He came in there like a little boy with his suit and tie. There's videos on YouTube. And then they said, would you like to be Prime Minister and President of Zimbabwe? Yes, please. Yes, please. I know he's trying to change it around, but yes, he was validated to get in there, for sure. He was validated. So this validation process provides position, title. Yes? And it also validates knowledge. What is considered knowledge and what is not considered knowledge from a Eurocentric perspective. This validation is not objective. Objective means that it is devoid of any subjective philosophy. It is not objective. In fact, it's questionable whether we can ever have objectivity, since we're all human beings and human beings have opinions. And opinions influence the way in which we think about things. Naturally so. Naturally so. Naturally so does opinion influence the way in which we view things. It's natural. So the question is, can we have pure objectivity? No, not necessarily. We can't. But at least we should say where we get our evidence from. But the European often doesn't. So what we get from them is something that tells us that this is the truth. But it's not the truth. It's a version of the truth, which has been validated through their various processes. They validate through peers. Peers means that you, your friends here, you sit down and you say, well, I'm going to give you a PhD, you are now a professor. Oh, and then I'm going to give you a PhD, and you're now a professor. Oh, and I give you a PhD, so all three of us are now professors. Yeah. Yes? And we are now the academia. And we sit down and we say, and then I come and I say, oh, I've just discovered a cure for cancer. We say, you're not part of our academia. Who are you? Who are you? How dare you? Go away. I have a cure for cancer. It really works. But we don't want to see you. Go away. And moreover, we want to find out, where did you write this? So we can stop that. We don't want people reading about that. If anybody's going to get a cure for cancer, it's us. We're the academia. Right? I'm making a joke of it. I'm making a joke of it. It's true. But this is how it works. Moreover, you three all went to the same school. Yeah, you three all went to the same school. You three, your parents all know each other. In fact, you're related somewhere down the line from such and such. So of course you're all going to agree this is how it works, or this is how it doesn't work in a moral sense, but that's how it works in a practical sense. So in terms of knowledge, the things that we receive, the information that we receive, is gone through a process. This process of validation doesn't mean that it's valid, it just means that it's been validated. Right, okay. The media, the next one please. The media helps us to get confused. Because the media, and I don't just mean the obvious media, the TV, the newspapers and what have you. I'm talking about the social media. In fact, social media is often worse.
Terrible.
It's often worse and more powerful. Right? How many YouTube hits have you got? Right? Who's supporting you on that? How many, what's your hit rate? Like 10,000, 10 million, 50 million? People like Justin Bieber exist. Not because of the Sun newspaper, but because of YouTube. But because of the social media, that's why we are forced to view him as a celebrity or Lady Gaga. They exist not because they can sing, not because they can dance, not because they provide any kind of knowledge which helps us to understand the world in any clear way, but because social media has validated them as stars and relegated James Brown to history and relegated John Coltrane to history. Right? Oh, well, that's the past. Oh, we don't really talk about them, right? Instead, we have to watch Justin Bieber and Lady Gaga, right? So, this process of validation is affecting our thinking. It's affecting our thinking, yes, and our value system, right? So this validation doesn't help us understand truth. In terms of an academic perspective, truth is shunned. The average academic, the average historian isn't interested in truth. They are interested in whether the thing has been validated. What titles do you have? Whom are you coming from? And the institution that you're coming from, has that been validated? And by whom? Right? Doesn't matter what you write. Doesn't matter what you provide. It's whether you've been validated. Now, the question is, what does that mean for our understanding? How do we try and grasp this world? Since unfortunately many of the people who carry out archaeological investigation, people that carry out scientific investigation on the ground, people that carry out primary research is the capacity to be able to look for information that's not already within the public domain, right? To get access to that, ironically, you need to have something behind you to get access to it. So that means there's all this information locked up that people aren't looking at, but it contains gems, magic. I don't mean magic like abracadabra. I mean magic like will help us understand the world clearer. But it's locked up in cabinets and what have you. I remember when Reverend Dr. Ishaka Musa Barashango came from America. We went with him to the British Museum. And because he's Reverend Dr. Professor Ishaka Musa Barashango, and he turned up in his African robes and he had his certificates, because I said, you've got to come with your certificates when you get to the British Museum. And we got there and went to the curator and we said, listen, we want to see the coin. The coin with Hannibal's African face on it. Oh, no, sir, there's no such coin here. We don't have that. He said, no. This man has come all the way from America, right? We want to see the coin that has Hannibal's African face on it, right? Oh, no, sir. I said, we want to speak to your manager. So we went to the manager, senior manager, all these managers. Eventually, the top guy, the director, came downstairs and said, all right, we'll let you look at it for about 5 minutes. He took us downstairs, like this, down, 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 down into the subterranean well, down, 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 into the corridors and alleyways and down, down, down. And then in the corner there was a vault, and it had a lock on it, right, with a timer. And he pulled out this tray with gloves on, with gloves on it. And he held it there. He didn't let us touch it.
Oh gosh!
And locked it back up again. Right? So this is what I'm saying. It's there, though. The point is that it's there. Yeah. So evidence is there, and we've just got to next one, please. We've just got to examine what that evidence is and have access to it. So this leads us to where I've been looking. Where I've been looking. Next one, please. Where I've been looking, which is on Africans in Tudor England. Right? Now, first thing is, who is an African? What is an African? Right? You might choose to use the term Moor, with good reason. You might choose to use the word Nubian. Right? You might choose to use the term black. It's got some issues with that, but you might choose to use that. Please don't use the word West Indian.
No.
Please don't use the word Caribbean.
No.
Right? And don't use some of those other terms, but you might use those other ones. Original people, whatever terms you might like to use. Right? So when I use African, I'm using that in that way. So before I started doing my research, a few people speculated. One of them was Peter Fryer, a European. That's not his picture, right? Peter Fryer was a Marxist, right? And he began to write speculatively. When I say speculate, he didn't have the evidence. He speculated on certain things. First of all, that there was an African presence. There was black people in England from time. And he began to write those things down. He wrote those things down way back. This is way back. Not before J.A. Rogers did, because J.A. Rogers wrote before him, right? The African-American J.A. Rogers wrote before him, right? But he began to speculate, began to collect some evidence, right? And then someone else called John Archer. Now, we may not know that John Archer, I mean the mayor of Battersea, you may not know that John Archer was also a historian. He was a historian in the African Progress Union. And the African Progress Union carried out primary research on African presence here in this country. Right? Next one, please. Then there were people like Ivan van Sertima. Professor Ivan van Sertima also carried out primary research. He worked for NASA before he became an historian. Right? Professor Ivan van Sertima, Africans in Europe, began to collect that information. Right? Also, people like Rasha Rashidi and others have also gathered this information. There were also Europeans like David McRitchie. Yes? David McRitchie was a Mason. Along with his other fellow Masons, European Masons, began to investigate African presence in England because it conformed to a certain type of political and spiritual power that they wished to gain. And therefore people like him and Godfrey Higgins and others began to speak about the African presence from way back because they felt it validated their position within the Masonic orders. Right? And their books are heavy and thick and complicated and are not meant for us to read. That's why you need to read them. Right? Godfrey Higgins and Eclipses, African Egypt, Light of the World, these types of books. Very important books, very interesting, very important. But all of these people, that's fine, all these people suffered in a certain sense. Because no disrespect to them, and I'm not talking egotistically, there was certain research that they could have done then that they didn't do. And in fact, nobody did it until I began to do it. Right? Because when you begin to do this type of research that I began to do, then you have to commit yourself to do it for a large section of your life. 10 years, 12 years, 13 years, whatever, right? Something like that, right? And that's if you're going to do it properly. If you're not going to do it properly, then you can't do it. You can't just dip in and out. This research means going back to the original records, right? Now, these original records will contain images and ideas from authors like Shakespeare and what have you. But also they will contain the original parish records. Now the parish records, when you get born, when you get baptized here in this country, somebody writes it down on record. That's why it's called a birth certificate. That birth certificate also has an original record. When you get buried, there is a record for your burial. That's called a burial record. It provides a snapshot of your beginning and your end. In the records that we now have, there is no reference to race or ethnicity in the records that we now have. We now have. But that wasn't so in the past. In the Tudor times, in the 16th century, people would write down a reference about the people that were baptized and about the people that were buried. And those records would be kept in large documents. These documents will contain lists of everybody who was baptized and everybody who was buried. These records are thousands, and they stretch from the north all the way to Scotland, all the way to the south. Right. Yeah. So there is a discrepancy between the fiction, the idea that we have of the past, and the reality of the past. Yeah. The reality of the past is far more complex and far more interesting, and you have far more of a major part in it than you may have thought hitherto at this moment. And this is especially the case in this country. In this country. Especially in this country. So, where are these Africans? And where would you start looking? First assumption is, okay, you want to work scientifically. You want to start looking at these records. So where do you look? Would it be the places that Africans now live in? So, would the Africans be, would the descendants of these Africans from the 16th century still be African now? Would it be anybody that looked like black, have ancestors from the 16th century who were here? That's an assumption, thinking pattern. But then, when we look back, and this requires a bit of knowledge, this is what we call deductive reasoning, where we deduce. We deduce. And in order to deduce, what we do is we think, okay, let's look at another period in time where they accept and where we know that there are Africans present. Let's take the 18th century. Now, there were Africans present here in this country in the 18th century, over 300 years ago. These people, like Francis Barber, who you see here, their descendants look like this. This is Cedric Barber, classified as white. Other people of African descent include people like James Francis Dudham, soldier, and a part of the 18th century. His descendants include people like Frances Dubb. I know she's got a big kinky afro, right? Right? But she would be classified as being white. So there's lots of these people from the 18th century, lots and lots and lots of them. Lots and lots of these people. And their descendants are white. So therefore I concluded, making my own deduction, scientific deduction, that the descendants of these people would not look like me. Right? Okay. Next thing, where would these Africans be? Right? I looked at the, not here, but I looked at these cities. These cities are the largest cities in England. Birmingham, Leeds, Bradford, Liverpool, Bristol. These are the largest cities that exist now in this country. Birmingham is the second largest city, right? Manchester and Birmingham, these sort of cities, right? Now, the problem is looking for Africans in these cities. There's a big problem. First is, these cities are mostly industrial cities. They developed in the 18th century and the 19th century. In fact, Liverpool was constructed effectively by slave traders and slave owners in the 18th century. The port was custom built by slave traders. Before it was constructed in that way, it was a village. A tiny village, very small village. Hardly recognizable on the English map. So if I go there looking for Africans in the 16th century, I'm wasting my time. But if I go there looking for Africans in the 18th century, then I'll find them in the 18th century, not the 16th century. So I needed a little bit of knowledge then of this country. So that meant that Liverpool was out of my equation. No point in looking at Liverpool. No point really in looking at Leeds. Again, because Leeds was a small village. Or even Bradford. These are small places in the 16th century. So then I thought, which are the largest cities in Tudor England? So I thought, okay, London obviously, Norwich obviously, Bristol obviously, Plymouth obviously, Exeter, yes, Exeter obviously. So these places, Plymouth, York, Norwich, London, Exeter. So let me look at these places. Now these are places, some of them, where we would not necessarily now think of people of African descent living in. So I had to put away my assumptions and think where the evidence was leading. So then I had to take myself off to these places, one by one, and look in their records. And the records are old records, kept very much similar to how that coin is kept. And the process of obtaining access to them, very similar to how one would have to gain access to that coin. It involves writing letters. It involves writing complaints often because you get treated first time badly and sent away. And then you have to come back, sometimes 2 or 3 times. And eventually say, oh, yes, you're the man that won't stop. You know, you won't let go, will you? I said, no, I won't. You're going to have to let me have a look at these evidence. Okay, all right. So then when you do look, sometimes the evidence is so damaged. It's been in there and it's never been opened. It's water damaged. Water damage means that the water gets into the original record. And then the record bleeds, as they call it. We say it bleeds and it fades. So you can't see what you need to see. Right? And sometimes the evidence is so frail that if you pick it up, it almost crumbles in your hand. It comes away in your hand. Right, but nevertheless, I persevered. So in these records, let's take Plymouth, for example. Went to Plymouth. The largest ward in Plymouth is the ward of St. Andrews. So I began to investigate that ward and investigate the records in that ward. Yeah. And in that ward, I found a number of things. First of all, I found Found Africans there. In St. Andrews, Plymouth ward. In the 15th and 16th century. I found Africans, right? About 5% of the total population was African in the St. Andrews ward. By my calculation, going through each page, and I mean going through each page in the record. It took me several weeks to do it, but I went through each page. I thought, okay, so I found them. And their names are referenced like Moore, like Blackamoore, occasionally, in the latter part, like Negro, occasionally, but mostly as Moore, as Blackamoore, sometimes as Barbary, sometimes by the reference simply of being black. Right, which we'll come to in a moment. Now, these terminologies and these ways of referring to Africans, yes, included the kinds of terms that Menchu writes here. Menchu was an English writer. So I found these terms and I thought, okay, let me be critical of my own research. Perhaps these terms like Moor don't reference people of African descent. Let me just be critical. Right? So I said, people do say that they do, and other people say that the word Moor simply means Muslim. If you look at the concise Oxford Dictionary, the modern concise Oxford Dictionary, it says that the word Moor simply means Muslim. Or worse still, it says a Berber of North African descent. And then with our 21st century mentality, we say, we think of this Berber, North African, Muslim, and immediately we think of someone with pale complexion. We don't think of someone with a darker complexion. And we overrule and outrule the possibility that someone could be Moorish and also be of dark complexion. We get very confused. Why would people choose to refer to Moors in that way? And why would they try and divide Moors in that way? When the 16th century, 15th century writers did nothing of the sort. I said, what do people in those times, how do they refer to the word Moor? Let me think about how. So I picked 6 or 7 or 8 of the most well-known 15th, 16th century writers and found out what they thought of the word more. I picked someone like Sir Thomas More. Now you may know Sir Thomas, may not. Sir Thomas More is one of the famous academics of the time. He's immortalised in the play The Man for All Seasons. He's a man that stood up against Henry VIII, yes, and refused to acknowledge his remarriage to Anne Boleyn. What does he say the word more is? He says the word more means black. Alright, okay, that's one. Let me pick another person. I've heard of John Menchu's dictionary, that's the reference here. What does John Menchu say about the word more? John Menchu says a Moor, or Moro, means black. Moor of Barbary, a nigar. A nigar. Moritz, a blackish, spotty colour. He says, colour, notice, nigrillo. Nigrillo, again meaning black. A little black, more, somewhat black, negro. Right? Again emphasizing that this word more, coming from the Greek word moros, coming from the Latin word more, means black. In other words, it's a reference to colour. Now they had other expressions to refer to people who were not white. They might call those people tawny Moors or white Moors. But a Moor, the archetypal Moor, was black. Not because I say so. I'm not saying so. It's not me. It's what the 15th, 16th century writers say. So, then I began to think about this in more detail. Because all those cities that I mentioned, those large cities, in 1596, some letters and documents were sent. And these documents and these letters say a number of things. The first letter on the 11th of July 1596 says, or people think it says, it makes reference to people of African descent. Right? It calls those peoples Moors, Blackamoores. And it says there are diverse Blackamoores, and they're brought into the world. Which kind of persons? There are already here too many. So this document tells us that there is a large number of people of African descent. These documents were sent to the mayors and the administrators of the cities that I've just mentioned. Another document, written in 1601, over 400 years ago. Over 400 years ago, says, whereas the Queen Majesty, tendering the good and welfare of her own natural subjects, greatly distressed in these hard times of dearth, is highly discontented to understand the great numbers, not little, great numbers of Negroes and Blackamoores, which, as she is informed, are carried into this realm since the troubles between Her Highness and the King of Spain, and who are fostered and powered here, yes, and most of them are infidels. It says infidels, having no understanding of Christ or his Gospels, and capable of understanding all his assignments, to take such Negroes and Blackamoores to be transported. Right. Now, the important thing is that these documents were sent to the people of these cities. So, there must be some logic here. In other words, if these documents were sent to the people of these cities, the people of these cities must have Africans living in those cities. It's logical, isn't it? Why would you send these documents saying there's great numbers? Why would you send these documents to the mayors, administrators and admirals and the other people that are running the administration of these cities if those people described, Negroes and Blackamoores, do not live in those cities? And yet you'll have Eurocentric historians who will write and say, no, they didn't. Then why bother writing these letters? Why bother? All right. Yeah, these people did live in these cities. They did. And the evidence and research shows that they lived in those cities. Now, when one begins to uncover these things, a number of things happen to you psychologically and mentally. First of all, whenever you're doing these things, you question yourself. You question yourself because you're discovering something that somebody else says doesn't exist. And also when you're looking in the records and the research, you feel something very strange coming over you. When I uncovered these people's lives here, people like Joanne Poynting, the wife of Thomas Poynting, being a Blackamoore, now buried on the 13th day of the plague, September. Yes, it's about 1542, right? And James Cuddies being a Moor Christian, and Margaret Person, a maid, married on the 24th of December. Or Helen, daughter of Christian, the Negro servant to Richard Shear, the supposed father being Cuthbert Holman, illegitimate, baptized 2nd of May, 1593, April. Yeah? Or Christian, daughter of Christiane, Richard Shear's Blackamoore, buried on the 14th of April, 1594. Yeah, so, go back please. Yeah, so, these sorts of records, when you uncover them, first of all, you think, you question yourself. But then through deductive reasoning, the logic must step in. Because these people exist. So you have to overcome your own contradictions as a historian. Because we have contradictions whether we acknowledge them or not. And my own contradictions were saying, no, they're not here. Before I began the research, I thought, there's a few of them. And I thought, they were slaves. And they were deported. That was my thought. And the word Moor meant Muslim in its most generic sense and had nothing really to do with people of colour or black people. Right? That's what I thought. But these records tell me something else, which is a big thing and a completely contrary different thing. But I have to bow to the evidence because it was written at that time. And the evidence shows me that my assumptions were wrong. And not only shows me that my assumptions were wrong, but the assumptions that every single other person who's been telling the whole world that the people of this country, who look like me, were all slaves. And the people of this country, the white people, used to enslave them. Continuously. And that the only people that ever existed in this country that looked like me were slaves. And yet these records tell me that these people were living in this country before slavery. So my understanding, my knowledge is then shaped by the evidence. Next one, please. And therefore I have to deduce. So the field research, the next one. Field research leads to a lot of different things. So when I did my research, I went to Plymouth, went to Exeter, went to Norwich, went to Bristol, I went to the London records. And I found in London in particular a number of important things. Now, the Africans, where we now live, people of African descent, we are concentrated in various places in London. Mostly South London and mostly West London. Some places in North and some in East. Places like Forest Gate, Croydon, Tottenham, Peckham, Brixton, Halsden, Willesden, these sorts of places. So, using scientific reasoning, would we find Africans in those same places 400 years ago? I thought initially no. We won't find any. Right, not find any in Tottenham. Right? Because these places that I just named were not part of London in the 15th, 16th century. I'll just say it again to you so you can be clear. These places that you're now living in, Brixton, Peckham, Tottenham, Dalston, were not part of London in the 15th and 16th century. So if you were looking in London records for them, you won't find them because London didn't exist in the same way that it now exists. Right. Granted. So, where was London and what was London in the 15th and 16th century? You need to go. Please do go then. You need to go. So what was London in the 15th and 16th century? Right? London in 15th and 16th century, right? There's now seats here. There's now seats here if you wish. Yeah. So London in the 15th and 16th century, was a much smaller place, centred around the city of London. What was the city of London? Places like Aldgate, St. Botolph, right? These places just across the sea. Just across the sea. Just across the Thames River. And that was what London was, the city. St. Botolph and those places around the city, right? This place was considered to be Southwark. Southwark was a lawless place, right? It was a place controlled by the Bishop of Winchester, where Catholics and others inhabited. Yeah, Bankside as they called it. And this place was not part of London. So, the London records, yes, would contain places like St. Botolph and Liverpool Street and these places. That would be, so I went to look at those records. Went to the Guildhall, went to the original record office to look for those records. And when I looked at those records, oh my goodness, I found Africans in Westminster, in St. Botolph and Aldgate, near Liverpool Street. I found Africans in all these different places in the heart of the city where you would not necessarily expect to find us right now. Very few Africans live in Westminster now. Very few, some, I'm not saying none, some live in St. Botolph and Aldgate. But that's where we were, in the centre of London. Right. That part was satisfied to me. I found over about 300 records. Okay, good. That nobody else has found. About 300 records nobody else has found. Okay, good. Now the next part. This is the more complex part. I began to think to myself, all these people that I know from Tudor England, whenever you see these series, these documentaries or films, there are certain people that keep appearing. Right? These people that keep appearing are important people to this society. People like Queen Elizabeth I. They're important because these people help to define the reality of a modern Britain. So, European historians have a large stake in maintaining the integrity and the image of these people. And this integrity and image means having an all-white representation, not only of them, but of the location and the area in which they live, since it's the foundation of modern Britain. This is modern history. This isn't ancient history. Ancient history they are willing perhaps to give some consideration for. Oh, black Egyptians, perhaps. Perhaps. Black Phoenicians, perhaps. Perhaps. Black Britons, what do you mean? What do you mean? Well, ancient Britons, possibly. No, I'm not talking about ancient. I'm talking about 15th century. 400 years ago, 500 years ago. Oh, no. Oh, they were slaves. Oh, they were slaves. Oh, they were slaves. Oh, we know about that. Sorry about that. It was a problem, sorry. It was slavery, wasn't it? And then we're satisfied, are we? Are we satisfied? We're not satisfied. So I thought, okay, let me look at these people. People like Francis Drake. People like Walter Raleigh. Right? People like John Hawkins. Right? These people of history. This is a picture of John Hawkins. Yeah? I thought, have they got a connection to Africans present in England? In England. What connection have they got to Africans present in England? Is that connection purely a matter of slavery? Or was it something else? So, when I looked at John Hawkins, one of those famous people, I discovered a number of things. First of all, John Hawkins had an African living in his household called Bastien. A Blackamoore, Mr. William Hawkins, buried on the 10th of December 1583. Now, this African isn't a slave. So on one hand, there's a contradiction there, isn't there? John Hawkins is conducting slave trading external to England, and yet he has an African in his household who is not a slave. So, is that a contradiction?
Of course it is.
But then how can we make sense of it? So, the first point about the slave trading thing is acknowledged. The second point about the African in his household, who's not a slave, isn't acknowledged, even though it's a fact. But you'll see a pattern here. Francis Drake, also someone regarded as a person that was involved in slave trading practices. Very important man, very powerful. And his activities acknowledged in written form and verbal form about his participation in those sorts of practices. And yet, Francis Drake not only spent time cohabiting with an African woman called Mary, he actually marooned her on an island called Heath Francisca, because he was frightened of the consequences that would come about as a result of it, but also had an African friend called Diego Negro. Yes, this Diego Negro was an African, a Cimarron, a maroon. Cimarron maroon from what we now call the islands of the Caribbean. Right? This Diego Negro taught Francis Drake, by Francis Drake's own words, how to fight guerrilla warfare. This Diego Negro, right, not only taught Francis Drake how to fight guerrilla warfare, he also showed the Englishmen, right, how to wage continuous war against the Spanish. Why? Because the Cimarrons and the Maroons were engaged in a conflict against the Spanish and not the English at that time in the 15th, 16th century. So Diego Negro also drew maps. He also drew maps for Francis Drake. So when Francis Drake began his circumnavigation of the globe, he began his circumnavigation of the globe with the knowledge that Diego Negro had given him. So this is the other part of Francis Drake's story that's never spoken about. But the part that he's involved, the other part is Walter Raleigh, right? Walter Raleigh was born in East Budleigh in Devon, in the West Country, near Exeter and Plymouth, these same places that I've been talking about, which were the centre of trade and commerce. And Walter Raleigh is important because Walter Raleigh, in his household, had a range of different people. In fact, I haven't found a European in his household yet. He had Native Americans.
What?
Yes, I said Native Americans, those same Native Americans that you see in North America, right? He had Africans. One pair of Native Americans they had were people like Wanchese and Manitoa. Wanchese and Manitoa were from the city of Roanoke. Roanoke is the settlement of the Powhatan in Virginia, in what we now call the United States of America. And Wanchese and Manitoa were the kings and chiefs of Roanoke in what is now modern-day Virginia. Right? Why? Why did Walter Raleigh have Wanchese and Manitoa in this country, in his household, treating them not as servants but as kings, their position? Because Walter Raleigh intended to create a settlement in Roanoke, and he did. So he needed these kings' participation, affection, trust, and he built that trust by keeping them here in this country, right? And by treating them as kings and queens in his household. Now, making us understand this about Wanchese and Manitoa, can we now link this? Can we link this, right, to the African presence? Is there a possible link here? Is there a possible link in why some of these Europeans would treat these Africans in this way? Did the Africans have something that the Europeans wanted? The answer, of course, is yes. The Africans had knowledge. They had gold. They had power. Right? Now, this knowledge, this power, this gold, right? They were looking for the city of Telemank. Telemank was a fabled golden city, supposed to be somewhere where the King Prester John ruled. Prester John was an imaginary, I say European imaginary person, right? But he was supposed to be a Christian king. Somewhere in East, West, Central, they're not sure where it was, but it was a city of gold, right? Where literally gold flowed through the city. The city was decked from head to tail in gold, and they were looking for this city. Some thought that it was in the kingdom of Ethiopia, and they knew about the kingdom of Ethiopia. And they'd gone there, and they said, well, this isn't the city. We've been around what is now Addis. We've been around, and we can't see it here. Others say it's not in East Africa. It's in West, it's in Central Africa, but it's a secret. You must befriend some of these African kings. If you befriend some of these African kings, they will explain it to you. They will show you. They will show you, right, where this place is. So what we see from these Englishmen, right, is duplicity. Duplicity. They are befriending these Africans. They are treating these Africans. They want the knowledge that these Africans have. Now, this is more than this, because Mansu Musa Aswad, who some of you will know, who travelled on his pilgrimage, his Hajj, to Mecca, and brought so much gold that it destabilised the European economy. You know the story, I presume, right? But what they don't tell you...
We're going to have questions I just got confused. Why is it that the British people, what knowledge is it that they're picking from their back?
We'll come to that. Thank you. Thank you. Good, thank you, good. So, what we don't talk about is the king before Mansa Musa Aswad. Mansa Musa Aswad's predecessor in Songhai, which is the kingdom of Songhai in West Africa. Mansa Musa's predecessor went west, not north. That's why Mansa Musa went north, because his predecessor had already gone west. He went west with thousands of ships. I'm not talking hundreds. I'm talking thousands of ships. They with gold and people, right, and resources. And he went west from Africa to the Americas. Why did he go from west from Africa to the Americas? Because he knew there was land in the Americas. Why did he know? Because his maps and his knowledge meant that he knew it. Was it a knowledge that was exclusive to him? No, it was not. The West African kings knew about land in the West. Right? They knew about land in the East, because they were trading to the East. And they knew about land in the North. So, this knowledge meant that in kingdoms like Mali and Songhai and Timbuktu and other smaller kingdoms, right, this knowledge, Europeans wanted this knowledge. Right? And these Englishmen like Drake and Raleigh and others, Martin Locke, right, Martin Frobisher, and these other Englishmen, and Queen Elizabeth herself, needed this knowledge. And there is no way to get the knowledge except through communication with the African. And that's why many of these Africans that I've just been describing were present on English soil. But they will tell you that all these people are just slaves. And I'm telling you that they're not. And I'm just giving you a reason why. Right, so, another one of these people we discovered, including someone such as Henry Anthony Jetto. Henry Anthony Jetto is a very important person, right? Not in the sense of major achievement, but in the sense of continuity of the thing that we were talking about right at the beginning, right? Now, what we also need to know about Henry Anthony Jetto is that this word Jetto is a reference to ethnicity, to colour. Jet being black, right? Even Jet magazine is named Jet because it's black, right? Okay, so Henry Anthony Jetto, in his record, in Holt, in Worcestershire, so I'll just say it again to you, right? Henry Anthony Jetto's record is in Holt, in Worcestershire, right? Not a city, Worcestershire. Worcestershire is a very rural area. I don't know if any of you know where Worcestershire, what it's like, or any of you know where a place called Holt is like, right? Well, Holt's a small village, right? Now, there aren't many Africans in Holt, but obviously in the 16th century there was at least one, more than one. We're going to find out. More than one, right? So, now, why would I go to Holt? How would I get from Plymouth to Holt? Well, the evidence led me that way because I was looking for someone called Henry Bromley. Henry Bromley was one of the most this is him. He's an Englishman, one of the most powerful people in Plymouth. So I thought, Henry Bromley's in Plymouth, and I've already talked about Francis Drake and Walter Raleigh and Martin. All these people from Devon area had relations to Africans. Perhaps Henry Bromley, like Drake, like Walter Raleigh, like these others, has a connection to Africans. How am I going to find it out? So I tried to look for his records. But the problem was that Henry Bromley didn't spend his life in Plymouth. He left Plymouth and went to Holt in Worcestershire. So I thought, okay, he left Plymouth, went to Holt in Worcestershire. Perhaps, if I go to Holt in Worcestershire, I will find records of his existence and perhaps the odd African. So I went to Holt in Worcestershire to find the records. And when I went to Holt in Worcestershire, I found Henry Anthony Jetto. Right. Now, in the record, and I'll lift it up and read it to you. This is the first record, written in 21st of March, 1596. It says, Henry Anthony Jetto, a Blackmore, and being 26 or year about, belonging to the worshipful Sir Henry Bromley, knight, being instructed in the Christian faith, was new baptized the 21st day of March, 1596. Okay, good. So this is Henry Anthony Jetta. Now I thought, okay, I found him. He exists. First thing. Second is his status. What is his status? It seems to suggest belonging, that he's a servant, or even a slave, perhaps. Okay, I have an open mind about it, right? But he exists. He's a Christian. Has he been forced to be a Christian? We can't know that for sure, but certainly he's a Christian. He's baptized as an adult. That means he's probably born elsewhere, because most children are baptized when they're children. So he's an adult baptism. Okay. So then I began to think, well, did he have a family? Children? Right? Is Henry Anthony Jetta? And I found his marriage records. Did have children. Right? And these are his children. He had about 7 or 8. About 7 or 8 children. Right? And these children, starting from 1598 all the way into the 1620s. He had boys, he had girls, Sarah, one, Margaret, Eleanor. These are all his children.
So to interrupt again, what's the big picture?
Okay.
What's the start?
Oh, we have questions we're going to have questions at the end.
Well, I'm trying to process.
He's missed out.
Okay.
Trying to fit in.
Okay.
What's the big picture? Because you're telling me stories and I can't.
Okay.
Fit
Okay.
it together.
I know you missed the beginning part.
Right, so that as you're telling me stories, I can't do anything with them. I don't want to
Okay.
have the bigger picture.
Okay. We're talking about black people
Yeah.
in this country
Okay.
over 400 years ago,
Yeah.
and the fact that they weren't slaves.
Are you saying that originally we came here and we weren't
No,
slaves?
no, we weren't slaves.
We were when we originally came here?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So these descendants, these children, go on continuously into the 1600s, 1627, 16, go on and on, into the 17th century. These are children and grandchildren, and I had to map them. And it becomes immensely curious because, as we know through the process of progenation, the descendants multiply. So the numbers of people that are related to Henry Anthony Jetta multiply. For them just being him and his wife, we get 20, we get 30, we get 40, we get 50, we get hundreds of people all related to him. Now in the records in the 1700s, they keep referencing the fact that he was a Blackamoore. But the later records, the Blackamoore reference disappears. And the jet, there was an ethnic reference to his colour, becomes a last surname. Jet. Right? So
I did him.
And this
The truth. That's what I put out.
this man is one of the hundreds of people who are the direct descendant of this Henry Anthony Jetta. Peter Bluck. He used to live in Holt, Worcestershire. Right? But it's not just Peter Bluck. There are hundreds of people who live in Holt who are related to Henry Anthony Jetta, because like he said, he had 7 or 8 children. And all of those children had grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And so the Blucks are related. The Jetts are related. There's even people called Blackamoore in Holt who are directly related. They're all related. It just happens that Peter Bluck was one of the people who was willing to come forward. I found lots of other people. But Peter Bluck was willing to say, okay, Onyeka, you're doing this research, all right. Right? I know you found me because I found him. Right? And I wrote to him and I said, listen, you are a direct descendant of Henry Anthony. I said, I've always suspected it. Right? I've always suspected it. Right? But because a number of different things, I said, what things? He said, well, I can't really explain it, but I've always suspected something. And then they says to me, oh, but I know my people have been in Hope for a very long time. And that's why I thought, no, it couldn't be. And I said, yes, it is. And this is the reason why. Right? And then he said, oh, but was this Henry Anthony Jetta a slave? And I said, no. I said, no, because this is Henry Anthony Jetta's will, written in 1626. And by 1626, Henry Anthony Jetta is a man of power and position. He has title and position and property. And that's why his descendants carry his name with such honor. So, these sorts of things, how much time do we have? All right. These sorts of things help us to understand what is going on. All right, so this next thing about science, the last 4 minutes, 5 minutes. I want to look at this other part of science, this question of science. Okay, first thing we've got to do with children now, we've got to stop teaching children lies about the colour of their skin. First of all, it's not a colour, even though I said colour. But I know why we use the word colour, right? But we've got to stop teaching them. Stop teaching them, for example, that our colour is just a reaction to the sun. Because it's not true. Oh, I have that colour because I come from a hot country. That's what people teach in schools these days. They teach our children, oh, you have that colour because you come from a hot country. I grew up in this country in the 70s. And I was taught that. Oh, but I didn't grow up in a hot country. So why do I still have this colour? And my descendants, right, may not grow up in a hot country. You still have this colour. So it can't be that I've grown up in a hot country, can it? So it's a lie. It's a lie. Yeah, that's right. So it's a lie. That's right. So it's a lie. A lie that's being told. Okay, right. Now, in the 16th, 15th century, Englishmen, white Englishmen, were living with and next door to Africans. And they were trying to make sense of their own colour as white people and the colour of the African. Right? So, in trying to make sense of this, they're trying to develop some kind of understanding. And this leads directly on to what we're going to talk about later on today. Right? Which is the question of the sun. Now, we know either two things about this. Either it's from the science of melanin, or if you're a follower of Dr. Savy, it's a science of carbon. Right? It's the science of carbon, right? These are two things. Anyway, so either way, some people say it's carbon. But either way, right, there's something going on deeply on a deeply spiritual genetic level. Right, okay, right. So these white Englishmen have to try and make sense of it. Now, the problem is that in their philosophy of monogenesis is an idea that the whole of the human family originate from one family, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, right? This theory of monogenesis means that Adam and Eve have to have some colour. Have to have some colour. But they believe it as a literal, right? Has to have some colour. Now, if the original man... One second. If the original man is white, then black is an aberration. Right? And other. O-T-H-E-R. But if the original family is black, then white is an aberration and other. So these white Englishmen, aberration means not the original. Yeah. So these white Englishmen are wrestling with this concept. They're trying to figure it out. Right? And some of them are saying, well, I can't classify myself as a white man as an aberration. So it must be you. Oh, I'm not sure. Right? Okay. So these Englishmen are discussing this thing. George Best in 1579, Englishman, right? Is looking and watching African men having relationships with white women in England in 1579, over 400 years ago, like I said. And he writes about it in his book, right? And in his book he says that the blackness is a curse. Where do you get that idea from? From the Ottoman Empire, mostly, right? But from the Ottoman Empire, mostly, right? That's another story. But then he says that this black is because it's related to the curse of Ham, where Ham sees Noah naked, right? And then Noah curses Ham black. But it doesn't even say that in the Bible. But anyway, it doesn't say that in the Bible. In any version, I've never seen it. But anyway, that's the concept. So that's what George Best says, right? Because he's not sure. Right. But another person called Meredith Hanmer, another Englishman, says, yes, that's right. But then he had a reason to say that because he wanted money to do something else illegal, which we don't have time to go into. So these are two Englishmen saying that. See, these people's stories are kind of known. And you'd kind of expect that from, or people would sort of expect it. But at the same time that they're saying that, other people are saying something else. The same Thomas More that I spoke to you before, has a different view. The same Thomas More. He says, it would be against reason and nature to state that it is not the heat that maketh his country black, and like reason of other countries was make their people white. I know it's in Old English, we've got to try and unpick it, right? I'll say it again. He says, it would be against reason and nature to state that it is not the heat that maketh his country black, and of like reason of other countries will make their people white. And then he says, what maketh black men was the sun, and not astronomy, magic, or the stars. Thomas More, right? Another person, this is a picture of him, Francis Bacon, right? He was esteemed to be one of the most intelligent people in England. He writes in his Experiment Solitaire, right? It's called Experiment Solitaire, right? In the coloration of black, that's the title of it. The coloration of black and tawny moors, right? He says in Novum Organum 1620 that this blackness is the result of heat and moisture, right? He says it's heat and moisture, not the sun, magic, or the stars. In other words, he's saying it's not a curse, right? So both these people, Thomas More, right, and Francis Bacon, are saying it's not a curse. They're saying it's the result of something else. Either the sun, in the case of Thomas More, or heat and moisture, in the case of Francis Bacon. Thomas Brown, in 1646, goes further and says, men affirm that the colour of Africans was a curse. I cannot make out the property of that name, it neither seeming so to them, nor reasonably unto us. For they take so much consent that they esteem deformity by other colours, describing the devil and terrible objects white. I didn't write this. White Englishman wrote it in 1646. This is important because it shows a white Englishman looking at blackness in the way in which black people look at blackness, and using that as the standard to determine what is the quality of that blackness. This is a very important point. This is a very important point. Robert Boyle in 1664 continues, and not only do we not find expressed in the scripture that the curse meant by Noah to Shem was at the blackness of his posterity, but we do find plainly enough that the curse was quite another thing. Goes on. Nor is blackness inconsistent with beauty, which even to our European eyes, he says European eyes, consists not so much in colour as an advantageous stature, a comely symmetry of the parts of the body, and good features in the face, so that I see not why blackness should be thought such a curse to the Negroes. So this is important for us in our understanding, because the earlier points we could perhaps accept, but the latter points are the more persuasive, and most people in England had these latter concepts. And this leads us on to this other point, in that the blackness and the status of the African was being determined by the African. The Englishman and the white man and other Europeans were judging how we judge our own status, and use that methodology to determine our status.
Terrible.
Right? And the way in which we interact with them also help them to understand their own status. It's something to understanding. Now, in the 15th and 16th century, Africans had civilizations and power. Right? So when a man decided to enslave another man, he might not think automatically of the African. He might think of an Eastern European as a Slav. Or he might think of another Englishman. If you were Spanish, you'd enslave an Englishman because he's easier to get hold of. But where you have civilizations that have power, you're more reluctant to gain control of such people. And it's more difficult. It's only in the position when those civilizations are destroyed systematically, and those people are brought low, and they begin to offer. To offer. You say, offering. Perhaps they are. Not just them, but all of them. And then, of course, we have the next stage, which is the stage that we're in right now. Right? Which is a far, far, far worse stage. Because even in the 18th and 19th century, there were Africans resisting slavery in Africa, the Caribbean, North America, South America, and even in Europe. And that resistance was going on continuously. But now we have the menticide of psychological slavery. And this psychological slavery means that we now got Michael Jacksons and Nicki Minaj's, right? And every other kind of mad, freakish kind of person running around, lightening their skin, blonde wigs, right? Offering themselves, selling themselves, destroying themselves. We have our children running around insane, mentally absolutely insane. So that we're less than nothing and regard ourselves in many ways as less than nothing. And then a European looking at us and, well, perhaps they are less than nothing. In fact, what are they doing on this planet? Surplus population, wasteful eaters. Wasteful eaters, surplus population. Right? So that's from the Global 2000 report. So I just wanted to end that here. So I said all this to you to really empower you to go and do more research, all of us. Yes? What I've done is nothing magical. It's just systematic. And the important point is that if you're going to achieve anything, one needs to be systematic. One needs to be continuous. And many days I'd wake up and not knowing what I would find. Right? But you have to be systematic. It just so happens that my systematic process over 10 or 15 years has yielded results. And those results are very, very important. Right? And I'm saying that if you are systematic in what you are doing, eventually that should yield results. But a process must have systematic part to it. One cannot be just airy-fairy about it. One needs to be systematic in your processes in order to get the results. When you do that, you will get results. Thank you.
I had a question.
Okay, we've got time for questions. This is the moment for the questions. But before we do, I asked Marlene to do this talk because he's written an excellent book, Blackamoores, and I know, you can see from the book, and I know the one's character to do work like this, that it has required scientific process. So this is why this title of this presentation is Working Scientifically with African Inheritance. That's the title of it, and I think Marlene's done an excellent job of bringing that. It is with great thanks to All Eyes on Egypt, to the organisation of All Eyes on Egypt, that we have a secure community space that we can gather and hear the reasoning. So, one for All Eyes on Egypt. And also for Marlene and for Narrative Eye, who have helped organise the event. I know you have questions, so I need to just put a few things forward before you get to the questions, so your attention is here. I know I see it. One, our trust is organising so we can have more secure spaces. I mentioned at the beginning we're about establishing learning spaces and securing assets. We're about that. When you visit our website or you speak to any member, you'll find out more about that. One of the things we're working towards is a credit union. And this credit union involves communities securing their resources in certain ways and being able to support families in need and to be able to secure spaces, build spaces like this. So I'm floating this idea to you. You have put your name onto our register, and I will contact you, our organisation will contact you to tell you more about this credit union and give you full details of how it can work. But the way it can work is one that will allow us to have our own metropolitan archives, plural, and have ones like this responsible for that, overseeing it. Things like this are the way. You have to put it in the hands that you trust. Okay, so that's one point. The second point, the event today, if you got the leaflet, we ask for a small donation, if you can. between £3 and £5 if you're able to do that. If you're not, that's fair enough. But
The pot is
if you
just
see the
right
will,
here.
the pot is there. Okay, so we welcome that. Thank you. Also, I mentioned the book, Blackamoores. This book is available here at All Eyes on Egypt. It's been arranged so that the book is here.
What's it called,
I
sir?
just spell it.
Blackamoores.
How much is it? How much is the book?
It's £20. It's being sold here,
Okay.
so you can have a look at it upstairs. There's lots of copies here. You know, it's better to buy it today while you have the opportunity, because Onyeka will be able to sign the book.
This is, as you see, that's a great thing to get the one to sign it. Having heard what you've heard today, purchase the book, get Marlene to sign it. This is a great thing to seal up the sessions of the day. Now, your questions. Your questions. You have questions.
All right. Well, the first question that I'd like to ask, and if you can put me straight, as you were saying that black people was here long before slavery. Yeah. I understand that Queen Elizabeth the first, she actually moved the Moors out, the Blackamoores out of London, or where, I guess I understand. So if that was so, was the lineage broken from the lineage from here? Because there was a time where she wanted to get rid of that inheritance, so to say.
Yeah. And the first part, we covered some of that in the early part, but I'll go back and repeat some of it so that we can understand it. I think you're talking about 3 documents, right? One written on the 11th of July 1596, another one written on the 18th of July 1596, and a draft proclamation written in 1601. Those are the documents I showed you. Yes. Before I began to do my own scientific research of those documents, I thought initially, right, that those documents meant that we were deported, expelled from the country. Certainly, those documents imply that. So, but when I began to do my in-depth research, first of all, I looked up those documents, and using what we call deductive reasoning, right, a little bit of intuition, right, and interpretive reasoning, which is to interpret, right, I began to discover something else. The first thing is that these documents weren't written by Elizabeth I, right? This is 1596, 7 years before she died. She wasn't capable of even writing at this point. She was mentally and physically quite infirmed. But the first thing is that they weren't written by Elizabeth I. They were written by someone called Thomas Shirley. Thomas Shirley and his son, yes? And they were written for a Dutch slave trader called Caspar van Senden. This Dutch slave trader was working from Lubeck in Germany, right? Now, Thomas Shirley, at that time in 1596, was economically impoverished. Right? He didn't have any money. And he was, not only that, but he was known about town, right, and about the court as someone who wasn't a person to be relied upon. Right. So he hatched this plot with Caspar van Senden to obtain Africans from England, and then he tried to force the court to accept it by wrapping up in patriotism. Robert Cecil, who was the person in charge of the intelligence services of this country, right? The Cecils are a very important family. They're still around today, and they're still in power today. So Robert Cecil, at first, showed an interest, then he backed away. Now, all of this is known because it's written down. Because those 3 documents people do know about, even if they don't quite know what's in it, they have that idea that you said. But then there are 5 other documents. 5 other documents written by the same Thomas Shirley and Caspar van Senden. These 5 other documents are petitions. These petitions are because the 3 documents that I just mentioned, that you referred to, didn't work. So they wrote 5 other documents between 1596 and 1602, where they are complaining that the letter that you wrote originally has no effect. That the Africans that we are trying to get hold of, we can't get them. Not only that, but these documents say that they cannot get one. The phrase that they use is any. Not one. Not one African. That means nobody is willing to give up an African, and they can't obtain an African. And this is important, right? The 5 documents are important because they show, right? They show, right, that these people are not slaves. Because if they were slaves, at least somebody would be willing to sell them, right? If they were slaves, they could just obtain them, right? They can't obtain, and the point is that they cannot obtain one, not even one, not any, right? Now, so this is the important point I wanted to say to you. Now, the part that I've just said to you is the facts. The urban myth, no disrespect to you, is what you said. Now, the urban myth has gone all the way around the world. What's this? They say that the truth, what's the word? That a lie gets halfway around the world before truth has put his pants on.
Or can I say it another way?
Yeah.
If you keep on saying a lie too much time, it becomes the truth.
That's right, that's right. So, by us thinking that she deported all the black, right, it makes us feel, well. But if we know that they couldn't get any, and there was no way of obtaining any, because these people were fostered and powered here, then that makes sense for us. And I say, these people were a different kind of people than the way in which they're being described to us. Because if we can just be deported, that means that they're slaves, they're inferior, they're weak, they can't fight back, they can't. But when we say, they can't get any, not one, mind you, not one, not one, right? It means that these people can't be handled in this fashion, right? So yeah, that's.
I've got a question as well.
One moment. There's an order for the questions. Brother, there's an order for the questions. Your question can't be responded to like this. Your question can't be responded to like that. Hold yourself. Hold yourself.
That's what I asked.
Okay.
Hold yourself. There's an order to the questions. Other people have questions as well.
Yeah.
I have a question, so I'll just...
We go through the chair.
You had a question.
Yes. Yes, first of all, I want to say thank you for coming. Funny enough, we actually have your books and we used to sell it previously.
Okay.
I saw a supplier and said we never have it, so it's good to have it back again. Brilliant. My question was, you mentioned about the Moors. In your record, it says that you have the Moors and the Blackamoores. Is there any differences that they were making then in terms of they having different status in this country?
Okay. I'm sorry, there's some people moving about. Sorry. I think there's a chair here for you. Okay. Okay, you can go with Phoenix, he'll show you. Thank you. Sorry. Good. Please do, yes, give up. You don't want to, or you can sit there at the end. Okay, all right.
There's a chair here. There's a chair here. There's a chair there. It's down to you where you want to sit, yeah?
Thank you.
No shyness.
Sorry, good.
Yeah?
Is it okay for me to ask you?
You can answer the question. Thank you.
Good. So can you ask a question about more?
Yeah, and the Blackamoor, or they call him a Negroid or a Blackamoor.
Yeah.
Any titles or any references to what titles they hold in this country at that time?
Good.
That's my first question.
Yeah. It's kind of a complicated thing, but I'll try and explain it as simply as I can. There's an article I wrote called What's in a Name, right? Which is published by History Today. You can get it online, I think. I think it's issue 62. And I go into this in some detail, about 9 or 10 pages.
Right.
I can't go into that kind of detail here because of time. Right. The first thing is, to understand a word, we must understand what it actually means, the word itself. Right? So the word Moor, how we know it is written like this, isn't it? M-O-O-R. Right? But it comes from a number of words, including from the Greek moros, right? And from the Latin word M-A-U-R. Right? Both of these words mean black. They mean black. Right? Now, in ancient text, right, blackness is a reference to colour of skin. And the ancient writers, be they Greek be they Roman, be they Phoenician, be they Persian, reference us by the colour of our skin. In fact, they say that our skin is the same colour as our hair. So these people aren't just black, how we would think of that term. They are proper skinned people of African descent whose skin resembles the same colour as their hair. So these are people blessed with blackness. Yes? Right. So these are the people they call the blameless, long-lived Ethiopians. Right? The same people. Now, I showed you Menshu's reference. This is John Menshu. John Menshu refers to this word. This word was used to refer to people of African descent. It was a popular term, right, in antiquity and up to the 16th century to refer to people of African descent. A popular term. Doesn't mean that there weren't other terms available. Certainly you could just use the word black, but that was considered to be quite rude. Right? So the word Moor was a more appropriate term in the 15th and 16th century to refer to people of African descent. Right. Now, you said about the word, an Ethiopian was a more ancient word that also referred to the same people. Thomas More, for example, refers to people of African descent being Ethiopians. But he also uses the term black, right? And he also uses the term Moor. The word Moor, Ethiopian and black were what we call synonymous with each other and could be used alternatively to describe the same person. In the records that I find sometimes the same person is called a Moor, an Ethiopian, and a black. Just didn't have time to go through them all, right? In the same English record. The same person is called an Ethiopian, a Moor, and a black. But a Eurocentric historian will tell you that they are all different people. Right? They're not the same people. And sometimes in the records, they're also called Negroes. In the later records. So they're called a Moor, a Blackamoore, and a Negro in the record. But the word Negro is a more modern term. Right? It's a more modern term. Right? And it comes through the bastardization of several different words. Sorry, I had to use the word bastardization. Right? Several different words. Right? Now, this word Negro was not a popular term. But the word Negro comes from another word, Niger. This word Niger is a Latin word. Like Simon Niger of Bactria. You know Simon Niger of Bactria, the captain of Alexander's horse, Alexander the Great, right? Simon Niger, this Niger means black. Now the word Negro comes from the word Niger, but it's a truncated version of it, right? A truncated version of it, right? It's been twisted around, right? But the word Niger is the original term, and sometimes in antiquity the people are called Niger. In relation to these different terms, and also called Ethiopian. The word Negro came in through the Spanish and the Portuguese influence. Yes. Right? And the Spanish and the Portuguese were involved in a conflict for 700 years. For 700 years against various sets of Moorish people. For 700 years. Eventually, they overcame these Moorish people. Right? Not only after 1492, but after 1609. Between 1492 and 1609, for the policy of blue blood inheritance, Sangre Azul, they began to implement a policy, right? This policy meant, right, that these Africans, these Moorish people, were then reclassified under various terms. One of the terms that they used to reclassify them was Negro. Okay. Right. Now, from the way in which the Spanish and the Portuguese used the word, that's how it came into the English dictionary. Right? I could go more into it, but you get the idea, right? So these terms refer to all the same sorts of people, but yes, the term Negro is a more pejorative term because of the history of how it's been used. Yeah.
Okay. Are there any more questions? I'm sure there are questions. Well, I'm asking that because we are 5 minutes over our time. We're 5 minutes over our planned time, so I need to ask permission if Mani will take another question or two. Okay, so.
One question I want to ask Maori is if the Moors people here, I know that they're the original people of Ethiopia.
Yeah.
So where does the Egyptian people and also the Hebrew Israelite people play a part in this?
Okay, good question. When I said these terms are a reference to colour,
Yeah,
not religion,
yeah.
not culture.
That's right.
Just again. So Europeans using this term would use this term to refer to all the people who have this colour,
Yes, yes. Understand.
except when they wish to delineate them and say, oh, that's a different set. But they would still say they're Moors because they're black.
Yes, yes.
Do you see?
Yes.
Right? But if the person was what we may now say, I don't like to use the term, but of Aryan descent or Indo-European descent, or what some people call Arab, although I don't like to use the term because Arab is really a language, not really a nationality, right? These people were called Tawny Moors to show that they are not Moors, but Tawny. Right? This is getting a bit complicated. Please stay with me, right? But the tawny meaning sort of lightish brown in complexion, right? But the point is that the term Moor or Niger was a reference to colour of skin.
Yes.
So these people that you're talking about, so long as they had this colour, would be referred to by these terms,
Yes,
irrespective of their religion,
yes.
their language, or even where they come from.
Yeah.
Do you see?
Understand.
Right.
I'm going to take one more question, but before I do, I want to make a point just to remind us of the theme of today, working scientifically with African inheritance.
Yes.
So, as I say, the reason why Marlin is a special one to do this is because he has demonstrated that he can work scientifically and produce great fruit for it. We, as a community, we might have a desire to draw on his great skill. Today's theme is to learn about the approach, the way that he's an inspiration for being systematic and persistent. So I would like us to, if you have questions around this, this is really on the point of what today is about. You can ask questions about the history, about the story, about the heritage. That's important. But today isn't a theme. We've taken on board the Science Week, National Science Week, and we've set up a program within this space and time. uLearn Naturally Science Week, African Perspectives. This is working scientifically. So how can we how can we improve the way we work scientifically? He's used words that are important, and I would like us to hold them. He's talked about being systematic. He's talked about the persistence that's required. He's spoken about being self-questioning and having no fear to question others. He's demonstrated the distance that he's prepared to go. But it's not about Marlin going that distance. That's right. So what I would like questions, and especially from the younger ones, you're welcome to ask questions. We need to empower our ones so that they can receive. You know, if you eat food and you don't digest it properly, it goes back out. And you might think you've eaten well, but if you've not digested it, then it's a waste. So we want to make sure that you're really absorbing the point. And we shouldn't leave here feeling, oh, we've got some bits of information. We should feel we've got a better idea of working scientifically and we can do it. This is the thing, this is correct? This is correct. So we want you, all of us, we want all of us to work scientifically. And I know that, as I said, we had planned to put it in another venue where even you could draw on things that are in the basement, even on full display at hand. But we didn't get permission for that.
It's all a lack of knowledge, really, isn't it?
Well,
you've got all the information there. It's just to feed it out to the masses, really, isn't it?
You're right. You're right.
But they're not going to teach none of this in the schools. No way. No way.
Okay.
No way. You know?
So
but you've done the research, you see. You know?
I think it's in the right. It's in the right place.
Definitely.
Because things like this, right, it needs to be steered properly. It needs to be nurtured. And it needs to be around the right kind of people.
Exactly.
Right? Because where you started off in your reasoning, you could see what happened. And it was supposed to happen.
Yes, it's true.
Because you know why? this is not your business, this is our business.
Yes.
This must be amongst our people.
Okay, you're right. Let me ask the three of you this question then. What does working scientifically mean to you?
Well, it means, well, to me, it means like sort of like doing research, basically, isn't it? It's doing the research. You've done a lot of research, haven't you? I mean, we ain't got the knowledge that you've got because you've done the research, you know. But it's the little that I've heard. I mean, I can feel. I mean, let's be honest. There's been a lot of lies that have been told to all of us, you know. Loads and loads of lies. So it's like what we're really doing now is an awakening going on with all of us. You know, it's just reprogramming, reprogramming, and just feeding it onto the young one. This is what we're not doing, and this is what we need to do. You know.
Okay, you're right. You're right. What does working scientifically mean to you?
Making sense of what's being given here and nurturing it, like you're nurturing a child. Care and attention, and being positively assertive in what we're doing, humbly, right, to get the right results, giving positively to get back positively.
Okay, thanks. What does working scientifically mean to you?
Yeah, it means quite a lot of different things. It means firstly of all taking all this knowledge and showing all our generation, not only our kids, but also our families and friends and colleagues of our ethnicity, of our black people, and to show them the truth so that they will not be misguided, they will not be leaded in the wrong direction. You know, it would let our youth think not to kill one another, you know, not to go out and steal and take drugs or take knife and stab one another and kill one another, but make them think differently, positively, and have an outlook in life, knowing that we are worth everything because we are the first people, and we deserve a lot. And we should, you know, project that in life.
Thanks. Yeah. What does working scientifically mean for you? I'm interested especially in what you've drawn from today, what you've drawn from the reasoning.
A structural system to gain like the structure within as well.
The structure within,
like mentally, emotionally, physically.
Yeah.
To change it on a cellular level and to correct it.
Okay. Yes. This is getting to the very heart of the point. My brother, what does working scientifically mean to you? I know you missed part of the beginning, but still.
Well, working scientifically to me means being strategic about things, having a good formula. And with a formula, you need various elements according to that to make it a formula. Consistency, strategy, endurance, various elements that will help that scientific work progress.
Okay, good, thanks. My brother.
Good thoughts, brother. In my understanding, I mean, a lot has been said is within the whole logics of it. I think it's having a systematical approach that is going to take you into something of getting to know something, an objective, getting to find out something about something.
Okay, excellent. Well, this is the thing now. So one of the reasons we've created this space is because there are some aspects of our knowing that other people, other communities don't recognize as a bona fide way of coming to know. Right. So under the, let's say, the label of alternate or holistic pedagogy, approaches to learning, we are validating the fact that we value our ways of coming to know. One point that was said, which really touched me, is that the evidence that Mwalim means teacher, so Mwalim Onyeka, the evidence that Mwalim brought, that Africans were brought here for their knowledge. This is a very, very important thing, and it connects so well to the science week. Science meaning to know. So it connects to a workshop that was done before on a related point about the Benin bronze and the beauty of it, but the actual science of it, which is it's never declared. So, what other questions do you have for Mwali?
I'm interested in what writings have you discovered on the Africans themselves. and how did they describe themselves scientifically, culturally, whatever it is?
I don't know if we've got time to go into all of
That's a good one.
I think that on this, we're going to have this as our final question.
Yeah.
Give thanks.
Yes.
Okay. There's one text by Leo Africanus, an Iberian Moor, Iberian African, which is a very important text because Leo Africanus is travelling from various parts of the world and to various parts of the world and making note of what he sees. And also, as an African from Europe, we get to see his reactions to Europeans and his reactions to other Africans. Yes? So that's one text. There are other texts hidden in the general text written by Englishmen, like what I said about George Best. That isn't a text about Africans per se, but he's writing about everything, and then he happens to talk about Africans present in England, and then there's other texts. There's the book called The First Book by Thomas More, a very large book. He isn't about Africans, but in his book talking about the world, he talks about Africans. Same with Francis Bacon, Nova Morgana. Then there are other texts written by Iberian Africans, various different ones, who talk about themselves in relation to other Africans. However, the problem is that some of these texts, the way in which they're translated, is not an accurate translation. So what you have to do is to learn the Spanish, learn the Portuguese, learn the Arabic, learn whichever language they're in, and then retranslate it using that methodology. But the first thing you've got to know about their existence. Now, the British Library has some of these texts. Some of these texts have been translated, but you have to retranslate them. Some of these books are not available in the British Library. Some of them are available in other libraries, yes? But they are there. Now, in those books, first of all, you get an idea, an impression. Number one, as I said before, Robert Boyle and the others, that the Africans have a perspective of themselves, which is a non-negative representation of themselves, right? And that this image of themselves seems to be backed up by the power that they hold and an understanding of their history, culture, and what have you. That the white Englishmen, for the most part, respect that history because they have to, right? And they respect that tradition, right? And in some cases, they know that that tradition goes back further than their own, and they're willing to say it. For example, the Greek writer Heliodorus. Now, I find Heliodorus' work for a process of deduction. Yes? Deduction in the sense that I had to deduce his existence. Because Heliodorus is not one of those Greek writers that you see written about often. He's not like Plato or Socrates. If I said Plato or Socrates, oh yeah, he's a Greek writer, right? But when I say Heliodorus, who's Heliodorus? Even if I said Herodotus, you'd know, okay, Herodotus, we know about Herodotus. But you don't know about Heliodorus, or many people don't know about Heliodorus. So I had to deduce his existence. How did I deduce his existence? First of all, I began to want to find out about the Greek writers and how they influenced Tudor society. So in my deduction, I made a list of these writers. And as I was going through these lists, I thought, let me look for the one who is least familiar to me. Right? And then if I pick the one, then I think, why is he least familiar to me? So this deduction makes me sort of raise an hypothesis. The hypothesis is that perhaps he's least familiar for a reason. That's my hypothesis. Now this hypothesis, this idea, this concept, needs to be challenged by evidence. So when I found his name, I thought, okay, what has he written? Right? Let me find out what he's written and find out if my theory can be proved. Right. So I found out what he was written. It's called the Ethiopian History. Right? It's called the Ethiopian History. Right? Right? So I started to read this. It's a story, but based somewhat on fact. And in this story, Heliodorus is talking about a white woman who is born from Ethiopian royalty, but attempts to get herself reinserted into the African royalty by claiming that she is African even though she's white. Right. Now, This story is very, very important because it shows the white as other, right? And the black as the legitimacy through which the white must pass through to prove its legitimacy, waiting for the black endorsement. So my theory, my hypothesis is correct. This is the reason why Heliodorus is not well known. Because this is the, you see the point. So this is a kind of process that one goes through in analysis.
Okay. Give thanks. As is the way, I know you may want to speak with Marlem and the team, but bear in mind we have another presentation starting at 6, from 6 till 7:45 with upstairs on teaching inheritance and evolution in schools. And there are other panelists who are coming towards this as well. So
that's later on this evening.
That's right, not too long from now.
Oh, okay, okay.
You have time to get some refreshments
and then
forward to this space again. So thank you again.
But all of these people suffered in a certain sense. Because no disrespect to them. And I'm not talking egotistically. There was certain research that they could have done then that they didn't do. In fact, nobody did it until I began to do it. Right? Because when you begin to do this type of research that I began to do, then you have to commit yourself to do it for a large section of your life. If you're not going to do it properly, then you can't do it. You can't just dip in and out. This research means going back to the original record.